Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash.
I'm Spencer. Not really from Knitting the Stash, but occasionally here just to have some fun.
He's from Meta Spencer. A lot of you watch him on YouTube. He's kind of fun. We talked about it on the Saturday Zoom, actually. Oh. Some of the latest Digger videos.
Oh yeah, I've got a Liam, little guy, who is going to get a shout out in an upcoming video.
Yeah. We like the small people in our lives. We like
the little people.
Yeah. Okay, so episode 150.
150.
Which seems like some kind of milestone. We should have a cupcake with a little candle on it. If I had any kind of CGI talent, I would put that right here
you
on
could
the
do
screen.
That. You could do
really?
That, yeah.
No way. So, yeah, I don't know. 150, what we're going to talk about is learning new things. Because... Look what Spencer got me.
She got a banjo.
Got me a banjo.
It wasn't rando.
It was a banjo.
Melissa said, I wish I had a banjo.
And sometimes, well, no, most of the time he listens.
So
and I've got to stop saying things.
I found a pawn shop in Vegas with the website, and now we have a banjo.
The pawn shop in Vegas part was really... Any sentence that begins or ends with pawn shop in Vegas.
Okay.
So now I feel like I need to figure out something to get for Spencer from a pawn shop in Vegas.
Man.
But that could be...
Heavy equipment?
Oh. You think they do that in Vegas?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
So she's been learning the banjo.
Yes.
And it's been really cool, but it's super new, like a super new thing.
Brand new.
Right?
Like, I played clarinet when I was a kid. Did you play any instruments?
I played hooky.
Okay, well. And I used to play piano a little bit, but like, I never played, and I played guitar a little bit because my dad played guitar. He was a guitarist.
So it's not like a totally new domain.
No, but banjo is different.
Its own.
It's very different. So I've been doing all the go to YouTube and find all the people who can teach you things. So it's kind of like I see myself in that a little bit because I know I teach a lot of stuff on YouTube. So it's been really fun to see how people teach things, to be the complete beginner. Because you can try new things in knitting or the craft that you're in the middle of or whatever. Like I'm going to start trying double knitting next week.
Yeah, but
you have so much of the foundational stuff there.
Yeah. Like you've knitted so much stuff. You learn double knitting.
Yeah.
It's based on a lot of knowledge and even motor skills and stuff. The first time she was hitting on the banjo, it was kind of like, how do I move my hand that way?
And I'm playing the frailing style, which is not the picking style. So I don't have any of the special things on my fingers or anything. It's just this, you basically make your hand into it's holding a flashlight and you just are you're doing a down strum.
But even that took a while to, it would probably still take a while to master or whatever.
It's so you just sit there just trying to figure out how to do this hand before you can do this hand. So it's very much like knitting where you're trying to figure out what to do with both hands, but it's different. Anyway, so...
I've got this buddy, Eric, who, when he and I were buddies, at first he was learning a lot of new languages. He was one of those language people.
Oh, Eric, yeah.
And it was kind of he knew so many languages that learning a new language wasn't that big a deal.
He kind of fit them into these hierarchies.
Yeah, it would be the syntax works like this, or the word order or whatever.
Yeah. We learned there are actually only a few languages that are unrelated to any other language. A lot of languages are really very...
Whereas I think of learning a new language very big deal.
Yeah.
I only know a couple languages partly.
Yeah. So you'd have to start over. A couple languages partly. I heard he speaks very good Spanish.
A little bit of English, just...
Yeah. And I got us around France when we were in France.
But languages are big, learning a new language. Yeah. Also, there's that thing in language learning where you never, once you're past a certain age, you never really learn it as well, or you always have an accent or something like that.
Yeah.
So maybe with the banjo, you're always going to have an accent.
I'm going to have a banjo accent. Being a 40-something playing banjo.
Maybe that was my thing with knitting. I always
had a
knitting accent.
But you did have kind of a knitting accent.
I did?
And you haven't knit in a while now.
I've been a little rusty.
Yeah. So...
I guess that's something about learning new things that sometimes you don't stick with it.
Yeah, it can be really exciting for the first bit.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've taught people to knit and they're really excited about it.
Maybe because you learn so much at the beginning?
Yeah, and then it's a matter of practice and specific skill sets and sticking with it day to day and day in, day out. And you have to really enjoy the actual process of learning, and you have to enjoy the doing every day of the thing.
Yeah.
Because if if you're just in it for the high of the new thing or the high of the final product or whatever, I don't think it...
You'll have enough products real quick.
Yeah.
You have a hat and a scarf and
then you're kind of
misfitting sweater.
And I think it leads people to think, oh, I know how to knit. Right? If you can make a hat or if you can make a scarf, you're I did that.
They do.
I know how to knit.
Don't you think they do?
And they do, but they're not invested in like the long-term kind of like
Yeah.
learning of a craft
All the
skill or
different
something.
stuff, yeah.
It's just a different.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say higher or lower, better or worse.
That'd be like
it's just,
learning a song on the banjo.
Yeah, be like,
versus
I learned how to do it.
being like an ethnomusicologist of the banjo.
Right. Like, I know, that's one of the things I was thinking with the banjo. Like, I know when I get into the banjo, I'm not interested in, like, becoming a session musician. Like, I'm not interested in, like, becoming so good at the banjo
Disappointing.
that I go back to Vegas.
We're going back to, we gotta go hawk that thing back in Vegas. I thought we had, like, a future.
No. So, I guess what I'm saying, though, is that, like, I think as you get older and you kind of know about how much it takes to like learn something to a certain skill level, like I'm not going to become a professor of banjo, I'm not going to become a session player, I'm not going to start a band. Like I know that I'm not going for that level. I'm just going for like proficiency. I'd love to be able to pick up the banjo and sit down in the kitchen and like play a couple songs when I feel like it. Like that's what I'm kind of going for.
Sounds good.
But with knitting, I'm like I want all of it. I want to like be the professor of knitting.
And learning something new, I guess you can sort of see that trajectory.
Yeah.
Like, do I really want to go long haul on being a pianist?
Yeah.
Or some new thing.
Well, for you, operator. Do you have that kind of thing with the heavy equipment, like buildings, or?
Well, I just know it takes a while. I think my big thing that I learned recently, like the last 10 years or whatever, was welding.
Yeah.
Like how to weld. And I would still say I'm learning, because there's always stuff to learn. Mm-hmm. But that was the thing. I was like, okay, this is gonna take a long time, a lot of figuring out.
Yeah.
But
you had to get the new equipment.
Yeah, it was just like a whole new thing. It wasn't, woodworking and carpentry, all this other stuff.
Yeah. Which like you've done that for decades.
Yeah.
So.
But I'm a little resistant to the new thing, just because I know some about what it takes and the time and the. Yeah. It's like I just think to myself, how's it gonna fit in?
Yeah. We talked about this with book writing, like the professor stuff. Like after you write your first book, you're kind of like, am I willing to go through that again? Like to write another book.
You sort of know what it's going to take,
you know
more
what it's
or less.
Going to take. Yeah, you're aware of the not only like the time, but like the all of it, like the whole package of doing something. You just have a better sense of it, and sometimes it seems too daunting, and sometimes it seems like you're not interested, you don't have time, you're not invested. Yeah. It's like you're asking yourself these questions that you didn't know to ask before. Because the first time you did it, you were like, I'm going to do this thing.
Yeah. Melissa's dad just wrote a book.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think the first time he's ever written a book.
Yeah.
And we were kind of listening to him talk about it. And I think we had all of our baggage as people who've written books before. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, dang, writing a book is just... But he just sort of had fun. He just wrote a book. I don't know, it took a few months or something. Yeah. And he just felt good about it. He's like, I feel good. And I was kind of like, dang, I feel bad about every time I wrote a book. They were like failure after failure. And
you've had a lot of book experience. Yeah,
you had a different experience.
You had a different experience of it. And it
was kind of interesting to hear that.
It's one of those things where like, when you're going to learn something new, it really is important who you surround yourself with and who your teachers are and who's like you're asking for input on, because there can be people who have a lot of baggage or who are jaded about it or who have like really specific, like, I don't do these techniques or that's a bad way to do it, that's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah. There are also these pathways into learning something that I'm more of the like figure out how to learn it myself. Mm-hmm. But there's some people who apprentice with someone and take classes. You like go to school for it or take classes. You can apprentice. You can follow a curriculum.
I'm more of that person in a lot of ways. Like I really like finding teachers that can guide me through stuff. Yeah. So I'm enjoying the banjo, and I found teachers like online on YouTube and stuff. But I'm still like the first thing I thought was like, where's a local teacher I could go?
Yeah, because you gotta know what works for you.
Yeah.
Like how do you actually learn? Like some people could be an apprentice and never really learn.
Yeah.
And other people take a class and never really learn. I think maybe not. I don't know.
So. I know I'm not a book learner. We've talked about this. Like you can learn from reading a book.
Straight out of a book.
And I just look at a book and like knitting diagrams. Like I look at those and I'm just like I'm so spatially I can't do it. So
when we were building this house, we had to wire it. So I just read a book. Like it was called How to Wire a House. And we did it. I just did it based on the book.
So, and then you told me about it. Like you taught me.
Yeah.
And I drew it all on napkins so that I knew where all the circuits were. I didn't know exactly how it worked or what it worked, but I knew
you did
from what you had told me, like these circuits would work. So that's how I learned.
How'd you learn how to wire a house? Just in a book.
In a book.
How to wire a house.
I'm like
a couple books. There were a few supplements.
I can't learn.
That's interesting. Yeah, different people have different.
Like,
but the banjo, can you learn how to play the banjo in a book?
People do, and I can't, like, I know there are banjo books out there, and it's like, that's not, I just know that's not something I'm
knitting seems to me, like, when I was learning how to knit, I couldn't imagine doing it any other way than you just showing me, like, physically, here's what you do.
So is that a difference, I wonder, like, with craft technical kind of learning, like, versus other kinds of learning? Because you didn't need that for the electricity.
Well, but for the welding, I took a lesson from Steve. Like a 15-minute lesson.
Yeah.
I just could not get past the beginning without a lesson from Steve.
Yeah.
And he's our buddy who knew about stuff. And
I forgot you did. Because you usually don't do a lot of lessons.
But it just took that one thing to get into learning everything else myself.
Yeah. Because sometimes we were also talking about
past
this.
The threshold.
Because if you start off and you really don't know what to do with your hands, like in a thing like knitting or the banjo or something, and you start doing it not the wrong way, but a way that's going to inconvenience you, like, over time.
It's like, you got to learn the right technique from the beginning.
Then you're kind of like,
I bet there are a lot of knitters out there. Actually, Sabina, one of my stepmoms, knits like a funny way or something. Like, she holds a yarn in some funny way.
People do it different ways,
and she just taught herself. Like, she taught herself when she was a kid. She's knitted
her whole
life.
My friend Beth does the same thing. Like, I watched Beth knit, and I was like, wow, like, how... and it works.
Like, she's not a thrower or a...
But it's like this totally different... Like, I can't even do what she was doing. She just does this totally different technique with her hands.
Sometimes it kind of inconveniences you. You might be better off learning a few basics. And
I'm not usually the person that says there's a right way and a wrong way. You should do it this way or that. But, like, there are certain things
conventions.
Like,
in welding, you want to ground stuff. You don't want to be the ground. I like stuff like that.
Knitting has a little less
you don't want to get fried.
Life and death. You know, banjo, a little less life and death.
You don't want to look at it.
But if you're going to be a surgeon, you'd probably want to, like...
just learn just teach yourself?
Yeah, teach yourself. Like, sew some things up.
It takes a community.
Yeah, I think so. And communities can help you keep going. Like, that's the other thing I've found, especially like knitting, is like, I love like
shared experience,
the
motivation.
Community, like podcasting, listening to other people who have done knitting, taking classes, going to festivals, like having my guild group, having the Saturday Zoom group. It's like,
it's a long list.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what makes it fun. It's just like, you know, people in the classroom or other people learning from other people and then teaching other people. Like, there's something about that that's really.
I find the online groups pretty good.
You have a few funny ones.
I try not to advocate too much for the online, but like online welding groups and wood splitting groups and outdoor wood boiler groups. I'm in all kinds of stuff.
What do the wood splitters talk about?
Just like a little motivation.
See, that's just me being biased.
They just kind of like I think it's like knitting, like show what they did and encourage each other.
Are there a lot of wood splitting techniques?
Yeah.
See, this I'm completely ignorant.
You know, are there a lot of knitting techniques?
Yeah.
Well, you know, you can split with a maul, you can split with a wedge, you can split with a machine.
Okay.
Machines are all different sizes.
Different kinds of wood.
Different kinds of wood.
Okay, all right, here we go. That's all you need. Proliferation of stuff.
Where are you going to store it?
Where are you going to store
it? It's as opposed to just being alone and engaging in the practice. You know, you feel like you're doing something that's kind of connected to a larger network.
Yeah.
And that's for some people, that's like a little bit awesome.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the knitting, there's some really interesting stuff with knitting because as I get into the craft, you know, you find all the books that are about the historical traditions. And then it's not only the community that you're immediately surrounded by, but it's like this idea that it kind of like
goes knitting.
Way back. Yeah.
Ye old knitting.
And it goes outward. So it's like there are the knitters, then there's like the people producing the fleece, and then there's like, you know, it's like you can kind of like play that out. There's the milling and the manufacturing.
Well, that was Melissa's approach to the banjo too. Like immediately figuring out the history of these styles and kind of deciding
I can't help it.
Which one, you know, some people are kind of like the history of the banjo, but
I started listening to like music theory and like the history of the banjo and like
whatever gets you into it.
Yeah. But part of that was interesting because like just with knitting, you know, there are a couple different main styles. Like there tend to be people who knit like continental or knit like throwers, but there's also like Portuguese knitting. There's, you know, with the pin and there's different styles, but like same with the banjo. It turns out there are all these different styles for how you play and it kind of matters which one you pick in the beginning.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that and I started one way and I was like, oh wait, there's this other way. And then I switched over to the other way. So it's, you know, there are like these stylistic things that you have to make a choice. And you don't even know,
really similar.
You don't even know what you don't know.
In welding, you can go stick, you can go wire.
For this stuff.
And there's a couple different wire techniques.
What's the MIG one?
Yeah, MIG's a wire method, and it uses gas, like a shielding gas, and some have a gas kind of, or a shielding gas kind of built into the wire. But when you make that choice, it kind of determines. But some people really advocate for always starting with stick.
Oh.
Like if you don't start with stick, that's like the basic oldest technique, I think. I don't really know the history of welding because I'm not Like,
Not me.
I have to know the history in order to do this thing.
You
read
just gave me
30
a
books.
look. I hope it got captured on camera. You're like, because I'm not.
I have no idea the history. I don't know if welding is 10 years old or 10,000 years old.
It's got to be like
I have no idea.
Relatively, like
Run
few
electricity
decades.
through a wire and melt it.
Well, it's got to be past electricity, so we're talking 20th century. Probably. Well, no, electricity goes back.
I have no clue. But I do know that there are the advocates for a certain pathway through learning it. Same with tree climbing. If you like a rope-based system of tree climbing, some people are purists and really recommend the Blake's hitch, which was not the original method, but it's kind of like the old school technique. And then you can get into all the mechanical devices. And when I learned to tree climb on a rope, that's what I did.
Yeah, I feel like your dad was an advocate of that kind of stuff. Like there's the way to do it. Like you start with this, and then you kind of like. So you kind of get those things passed down a little bit.
Uptight.
But those methods are interesting to think about, like how.
Like with knitting, do you have to start on straight needles, or can you?
Well, some people recommend that you start with like the old school way to teach knitting is like straight needles.
Yeah.
And like acrylic yarn and a scarf, which
no
one. I mean, like that's turned so many people away from knitting. It's like.
So you would start on circular, the newfangled circular needles.
Not as, you know what I found out about circular needles? They used to
the
have,
history. Oh.
They used to have a chain, like an actual chain.
Actual chain.
Yeah.
How thick of a gauge?
I don't know. I haven't had time to look it up, but I found that.
But like the chain you'd have on your.
The chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because now they're all plastic. That's like mid-20th century or something. Well, episode 151 of the podcast.
I already promised
of the chain.
that we would do some time.
Are you serious? I'm sorry, guys. Just scroll ahead to 152. It'll be about sweaters or something.
Okay, look. All of this makes me think. Like, I don't know. I'd like to know what other people think about learning, because I'm beginning to wonder. I hear us talking and I'm like, is it just because we're crazy professor, like nerdy professor, like
hit it up in the comments the real way to learn something.
Yeah, because we maybe think too much about this because we're always teaching students. Or like,
so what else are you doing in the cast?
I'm gonna talk about that sweater over there. I'm not gonna play the banjo.
Did you knit another sweater?
I'm not good enough yet.
Is that a new sweater?
That is a new sweater. That's the Lunenburg sweater. We can talk about that a little bit.
The Hindenburg?
The Hindenburg.
Congratulations.
We're gonna call it the Hindenburg. That's great. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me on the cast.
Yeah.
Check you guys out in the comments. I'll see you in the comments.
Yeah. Well, that was quite a fun conversation, and we kind of jumped straight into it, so I hope you didn't get too disoriented if you are a new viewer, and I'll take this moment at intermission to just say hello, welcome to the Yarn Room, and welcome back to all of you who are coming back, and welcome to new viewers. This tends to be a podcast about knitting, sweaters, and garments, and garment modification and design. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the second segment here. What I've been working on is the Lunenburg Pullover, like we just mentioned. Is this an Amy Christoffers pattern? I think it is. I could be wrong. I'll make sure I put the name down here like I usually do. And Lunenburg has been around for a little bit of a while, I think. It is beautiful top-down yoke sweater. And the yoke is knit in the boho style, so it has purl stitches integrated into the colorwork up here, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And yeah, it's been a really fun knit, and like I mentioned when Spencer was on, I was doing some filming of myself knitting with two colors. You know, I knit, a lot of us who knit two colors will knit with two yarns, one in each hand. So I'm a thrower normally, so I throw with the background color, and I pick with the contrast color. And I also have a little bit of footage of me doing 3-color work, which I do. I'm curious to know how other people do it. My technique is to just kind of keep everything managed. And my feeling about these kinds of things, as you might have gathered from the conversation we just had, is that whatever works for you and makes, you know, an end product that you're happy with, it's great. It's a good technique as far as I'm concerned. So you might see me doing the 3-color work in a way that's different from what you do. And it's just, that's how I do it. So I'd love to know how you do it. The other thing about this was I decided in this particular sweater to learn finally how to do the purls continental style. So I've never learned how to purl continental style. and like by picking, so by holding the yarn in your left hand and picking it up with the needle. So I decided to take this yoke as an opportunity to try to practice that a little bit. So I filmed myself doing it just so that I could see what it was like, and you could see what it's like for even someone like me. I've been knitting for, oh my gosh, 13 years now or something. And there are techniques that I don't know yet. Just like, a lot of us, there are a few techniques we don't know. And so learning how to do that was a really interesting, process, because my hands, which are very cooperative when I knit, because I'm so used to doing certain kinds of things, they're so cooperative, they became very uncooperative when I was trying to do this new technique. So, we've talked about that on here on this podcast before. I think it's important, especially for people who are maybe more advanced knitters or have been knitting longer, to keep sharing those places and things that are new to us and that are challenging, because I think it's encouraging for people who are just beginning knitting to know that, we're not just like capable of doing everything all at once perfectly. There's a learning curve, right? So that was really fun to do. There are a lot of different purl rows in this, and you can see, I'll bring this closer to the camera here, and you'll be able to see it on the footage as well. So you can see the pearls mixed into the color work, and it creates this beautiful texture. I love the boho style of knitting. I've also knit a sweater. It was the Flight Sweater by Sarah Pope, if I'm remembering right. And that one has much less color work. It's sort of a small band up here, but it also had pearl stitches mixed in. So it's a really cool style, and it gives like some really interesting texture to a yoke that makes it kind of pop in different ways. And then color-wise, we were talking about this on the Saturday Zoom. I changed the colors a little bit because I was following another Raveler, and the name just totally escapes me. I will put it on the screen. She did a beautiful job substituting in a couple of colors. In particular, I think the original Lunenburg has a kind of ochre or like burnt umber kind of orangey color and a yellow color. And I kept just one, so I just have the green in there, which is also, I think, in the original. And the Raveler I was following swapped out a couple of those kind of more fall colors for something a little brighter. So that's why you get the pink in here and the light blue, which I think lightens up the yoke quite a bit. And I really love these colors. I know it's a subtle difference if you look at the original and you look at this color combo. Subtle difference, but it makes a world of difference, I think, especially if you're not as interested in kind of like the ochre, yellow, kind of green color scheme for the sweater. If you just pop out a couple of colors and lighten them up, it really makes it kind of pop a little bit. And I feel like it's a little more like a spring meadow, or even it's more like a spring meadow or a fall meadow than like a late fall meadow, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't know. I'm just talking about color without color theory. The yarn for this is Lichen and Lace, Rustic Heather Sport, which I've knit 3 other sweaters in at this point. It's a singles yarn, and it is, I've talked about this on here before, it's a singles yarn that feels slightly fold or felted, so it does have some strength to it, but it's a little bit finicky. Like if you pull on it too hard, it will, like here's the end. If you give it a tug, it will come apart. So it is just a singles. It doesn't have all of the plies to kind of give it a lot of support and things like that. But it comes in a really beautiful range of colors, as you can see. And you can also, I learned this from my wonderful Canadian friends on the Saturday Zoom, you can get this same yarn, basically not dyed by Lichen and Lace, from a company called Briggs & Little, something like that. I'll put it on the screen. They're the ones who actually make the yarn, and then Lichen and Lace, I think it's Megan. Is it Megan at Lichen and Lace? She dyes it and does the Rustic Heather Sport, but you can get it either way. So that's kind of nice to know. It's a really, I like the pattern of the sweater is really easy to follow. Amy Christoffers is a good designer, and you can see that there is some short row shaping that happens right after the colorwork yoke, which raises up the back in a nice kind of way. And I am trying to remember other mods that I've done so far. I did what I usually do, which is cast on the underarm stitches provisionally. We've talked about underarms on here a lot. I really love the clean look of an underarm that doesn't have picked up stitches. So this is the provisional cast on, so that the stitches are going to be going in 2 directions. So they're you can pick them up to go down with the body, and then you can pick them up to go this way with the sleeve. And I did my usual tricks in the two sides of the armpit to make sure I don't get any holes there. So usually what that means is picking up an extra stitch on each side and then knitting two together so that you kind of close up the little mini holes that you get in the armpits. And I really like the way that ends up looking. This yarn has worn pretty well over the years, and like I said, I've knit 2 or 3 other sweaters in it. So I know what it's going to do. It's going to pill a little bit, and since it's a singled, it does bias just a little bit when you're knitting it. But I've always found that once you wash it out and dry it, block it, it's just fine. And one of the cool things about this yarn, kind of like a lot of people feel, I think about like things like Lopi yarn or Rauma or some of those real like, I was just watching Sarah on Fiber Trek, you know, the workhorse yarns that a lot of us use. I tend to think of this one as a kind of workhorse yarn for me. I've knit so many sweaters in it. I know how it's going to act. There's so many beautiful colors you can choose from, and I've knit the sweaters, and usually I knit them in the same size needles or same gauge or very similar gauge, so I can usually guesstimate pretty well, either by using my other sweaters as a giant gauge swatch or adjusting that gauge swatch just a little by going up 1 needle size or down a needle size, so I don't need to swatch, which is awesome for those of you who are garment knitters. If you can find ways to use the same yarn in different sweaters, you don't always have to swatch, which is pretty amazing. So this kind of yarn I don't swatch in anymore, or unless, you know, if I can find a similar gauge or the pattern's in a similar gauge. And like things like Lopi yarn, I don't really feel like I need to swatch anymore because I tend to know what Lopi is going to look like on my needles. Of course, if the project is going to have a very, very different gauge than what I've done before, like a very loose gauge or a very tight gauge, then you'd probably want to swatch. But in general, people tend to use similar gauges for these yarns when they use Lopi, when they use Lichen and Lace, you know, Rustic Color Sport, when they use, you know, the Rauma yarns, things like that. It's like you kind of know what you're getting, which is really nice. Okay, back to modifications. I did a split hem, which is what I usually do. And you can see the hem isn't reinforced at this point. So what I'll do is I'll take my tails and weave them in and then come up here and do just a couple of stitches to reinforce where the split actually happens. There are a couple ways to do that. Albina McLaughlin's patterns have a lovely, usually have a lovely way of doing the split hems. You know, there are a couple of other designers that have a couple little tips and tricks there. If you don't want to go back and reinforce it later, they do a couple little special magic things. So look for that when you're working on the patterns. This is that provisional cast on I was telling you about. So I have all of the sleeve stitches up here are on waste yarn, so they're live. And then down here, I've used this waste yarn to cast on these stitches provisionally. So then I was able to work down on the body and finish the body, and there's still live stitches right here. So when I go to pick up my sleeve stitches, I just pick these up, pick up an extra stitch in the corners, and then just start knitting down. And I'm just kind of going with my own decreases on the sleeves. I tend to do that now anymore. You can see my little pin trick here. I tend to mark my decreases so that way I can mirror them on the other side. That way I don't have to count anything. I don't have to, like, you know, write anything down. I can just use my knitting as my notebook, basically. So I keep all my little markers there. And I'm kind of decreasing like every, what is that? Like every 1.25 inches or something like that. So I'm coming down. I actually added a few stitches to the sleeves and a couple stitches to the body because the sizing on this one was I think it was either a 35 or a 39 or something like that. And I wanted to be more like 37, 38. So I just, you know, just keep that in mind. We were talking about this on the Saturday Zoom too. Like a stitch here or there isn't going to massively change a pattern usually, unless it's like there are specific times when that would happen. Like if you have a lace repeat or, you know, certain things like that. But, you know, a couple stitches here and there on this plain stockinette portion of the body or the sleeves, no one's going to notice. And all you have to do then is try to get rid of those stitches if you want to later on with decreases, or just keep them because you like them, right? I ended up knitting this body straight down. I often do that with my sweaters. So there's not any shaping in here, but I did add a few extra stitches, I think 4 or 5, to the stockinette right before I split for the split the sleeves from the body. So yeah, and a few extra stitches on the sleeves, just because I have broad shoulders and I wanted to like make sure that everything was going to be wide enough and big enough. And then I'm just kind of going down, and I'll just get to wherever I get to when I get to my actual wrist, and then I'll do some ribbing probably, and the ribbing will always pull it in. So yeah, it's just kind of like a low maintenance, low worry kind of way of knitting a sweater like this. That's very stockinette after the yoke and very kind of chill. It's just kind of, for me, it's a little more fun than fussy, and I like that. So if you're that kind of knitter, just keep in mind that you can do anything you want, especially when you're just working in stockinette. You can play around with stitch counts. You can, your sleeve doesn't have to come down to the exact stitch count that the designer has decided for you in a lot of cases, especially if it's plain. So you have the freedom to kind of play around with that. And that's really, I think, freeing for a lot of knitters to realize that, like, you don't have to follow everything to the specs of the pattern. You can do what you want to do, and it's all good. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with the way this one's coming out. I'm looking forward to wearing it. The weather is starting to kind of think about turning here. The goldenrod is out, and there's a little bit of a cooler air at night. So maybe we'll get fall in the next month or so, and I'll be popping this guy on. It'll be all finished. But I've also been working on a couple of new patterns. In the background, I have my blanket going. Still going on. This is a fingering weight blanket. I really cannot remember the name of it now, but it's on the bias, and I've basically used up a lot of my fingering weight superwash yarn in that blanket, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I picked up a shawl, and let me grab the pattern. So I was spending a little time up in the yarn room last weekend, actually just relaxing and kind of looking around. And I picked up the first issue of the Journal of Scottish Yarns, which is the yarn. It's just called Yarn. And I was looking around in it, having some fun, and I happened upon this Forvie Shawl. And this is the insert that came with the magazine for it. So it's like, this is the actual like pattern. It's a lot of lace and whatnot. But this is what the shawl looks like, kind of spread out. It's meant to be knit in a couple colors so that you can move from the lace on the one side to this kind of texture on the other side with different colors. So I'm knitting mine in a deep dark blue like this on this side with all the lace. And then I've switched over to a really beautiful silver blue for the other half. For me, the blue and gold was a little bit like sports teams, so I always try to avoid that in my knitting. So I'm going with the blue and a kind of like silver. And it's a really fun knit because you're doing a lot of the same techniques over and over again with the yarn overs, and then the texture is slip stitches. So it's really like a very fun, engaging kind of project. And it's really nice to have something else to switch off. So like I can do my stockinette knitting during meetings or at night when I'm tired, and then when I have a little energy, I can pull this guy out and play around with lace and charts and all that kind of fun stuff. And I'd recommend the Journal of Scottish Yarns. It's a really cool journal. There's a lot of fun content in there, and I think they're on to issue number 3 or 4 at this point. I'm trying to get some of the back issues because I really enjoyed reading it. Yeah, and then the other project I'm going to start working on once this shawl is done, just to keep things interesting, is some double knitting. Because I have some double knitting books. I've taken a class on double knitting, but I've never actually done I don't think I've done any double knitting. So I'm just going to try it. And I got the bubble scarf pattern, and I cannot think of the designer's name right now. It will pop into my head right when I'm done with the podcast. And I have her class up on Craftsy for double knitting. And yeah, just want to kind of do that just because it's fun. And, I like the idea of creating a 3-dimensional object, so that you're double knitting, you're basically knitting 2 sides of the fabric at the same time, but there's a kind of space in between them. So you're just working on this side of the fabric and this side of the fabric, and all of the stitches are on the needles at once. I think it's just fascinating. So keep trying new things, right? There's always more techniques to learn with knitting and spinning and weaving and whatever else you're doing. If you're welding, whatever you're doing, there's new stuff to learn. So yeah, keep it up. I think that's it for this weekend. I'm going to go get this edited and out to you all, and yeah, try to enjoy the rest of the Sunday. I'm going to make some cupcakes, and yeah, it's kind of rainy, so just stay inside and do some knitting. Could be fun. If you are looking for me and you want to catch up with me, knittingthestash.com is the website. You can take classes with me over there. You can pick out yarn from the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. All that kind of good stuff is over at knittingthestash.com. Otherwise, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope you have a great couple of weeks until then. Bye-bye!